Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. I'm just going to do a May wrap up for you today. I read quite a few books in May, I think, in the end, partially because I was like trying to. Thinking back to the beginning of May is weird because it feels very, very long ago. And yeah, but the first book I read was I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. Right, so yes, I read this and you know, this is like a big book for the year, but I read it and I listened to the audiobook of it. I think the fact that I'm not heterosexual does really impact how I feel about the like book of the moments kind of thing. Because obviously I think a major trend in literary fiction of recent years is like a sort of re-evaluation of heterosexuality, not necessarily by heterosexual writers. I mean, and the main character of I'm a Fan is probably bisexual. I mean, she never labels herself or anything. And you know, that also makes me think about like Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, which also is sort of about evaluating or re-evaluating heterosexuality, but also like the main character is bisexual. And you know, I'm sure there's others, and you know, but often these lit fic books are really focused on like the relationship between a woman and a man and how it's like not working for the woman, and sometimes how it's not working for the man. At least from sort of how I've watched people talk about these books, that's also what I would like take away from it, not having read loads of them, partially because I don't feel like I need to read those kinds of books, or I don't feel like particularly implicated in a discussion about that because I'm not interested in, I don't know, I feel like I'm getting all clunky talking about this, but anyway, that all being said, I can kind of understand people's like, you know, just like of the book, but I also sort of feel like it wasn't incredible. I did really like it as a kind of book about art and like the art world, and criticizing the art world for being a place of just like a sort of playground for the white wealthy people. I think there is a weird tension in the book between the kind of narrator's really sort of right on politics, especially in terms of gender and class and also race, but then her complete lack of like sort of putting that really into practice. I mean, maybe that's not entirely fair, but like sort of fair. You know, she has this like very cynical and sort of grounded, I guess, perspective on like gender relations and power dynamics, but then she's in this like extremely fraught and power dynamic related relationship with a man who is cheating on his wife with her, but also cheating on her with somebody else, and the woman he's cheating on her with, sort of, I mean, obviously it's sort of a bit like, are they really cheating if they're already cheating, you know? I don't know. I guess that depends on what kind of cheating you participate in. But like, the woman that he's in a relationship with is somebody she's obsessed with on Instagram, so it's also a sort of social media novel. And yeah, I mean, so I think this had some interesting things to say. It also didn't necessarily, like, I didn't find any of it particularly like revelatory or new. The next book I read was Cheerful Weather for the Wedding by Julia Strachey, talking about books that kind of question heterosexuality, I guess, sort of. Not really, I don't know. This is like a really short book that is sort of like, yeah, it's just about this woman who's about to get married, and it kind of focuses on her, but also like the people around her, and she doesn't really want to get married. I don't know, there's really not much to this, but kind of expected it to be funnier. I didn't find it especially funny. If it is funny, it's like tragicomic, I guess, is maybe the thing. It's from the 30s, first published by the Walsall Hogarth Press. I think the reason why this was on my radar is because I was like, oh, this is going to be some like gossipy stuff because of like Julia Strachey, I'm not sure how you pronounce her name, I've never said her name out loud, participating in like Bloomsbury circles and stuff like that. But yeah, it wasn't as like gossipy as I wanted it to be. But yeah, it was easy to read, interesting to read stuff from the 1930s, I guess. Like, it wasn't anything to write home about, as they say. I read like a few sort of like buzzy books, even though they're like buzzy from times gone past, I guess, or this one is. So this is No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. Yeah, that's right. And this is also a social media novel, but it also is maybe like quite different from a lot of them, or I don't know, I guess I haven't read it enough, but from the way people talk about it, and also this like massive shift that the book itself has, you can kind of tell that maybe it is like stepping away from what is now sort of the trope of the social media novel. So This is a book about a woman who's like obsessed with the portal, which is the internet, Twitter generally, and you know, I think it's heavily autobiographical, really based on Patricia Lockwood's experience of the internet, and then also her writing and talking about it. Yeah, and so the first bit is just sort of like very intense in terms of how meaning is made or not made on the internet, how outrage works, just like the energy and the space and the time and the brain space of the portal. And it does read quite a lot how the internet does, in the sense that you are like somewhat bombarded. You can be reading a really cute story and then suddenly something really violent has happened, and then you're reading memes, but then you're also reading about genocide, you know, like all of this stuff is coming at once, and it's very difficult to have like adequate or correct responses in a landscape of communication that is like so intense and so ongoing, and just like doesn't really have boundaries with you, and you then don't have boundaries with it. Obviously people do get quite like intensely obsessed with Twitter and with social media. So yeah, there's that, and then something happens that sort of just like shifts the perspective and the novel itself away from its centre, which I guess was the portal to begin with. It is to do with pregnancy and reproductive health care, and to do with loss as well. Yeah, I think in my like review I wrote something, I mean, you know, just like one sentence, but I think I said something like how, you know, I thought people had been really unfair about this book, and I do think that people have been quite unfair about it, because I think it's much more than just the beginning bit, and it's on purpose. And also the beginning bit I think did take work and craft to make it feel the way it did. I wouldn't say that I love this novel or I gave it 5 stars or anything like that, but yeah, I think it is saying something interesting about the experience of being online. I also think it's saying something about the difficulty of loving people and the fragility of human life. Yeah, and obviously I personally am really interested in not only reproduction, social reproduction, pregnancy, mothering, care work, but also how those things are represented textually and like in novels and in fiction. I also just found it interesting to read from that perspective, and yeah, I'm glad I picked it up. Right, the next book I read was Minerva, The Miscarriage of the Brain by Johanna Hedver. So this collects like a bunch of work from 2011, I want to say, into like 2016 or so, by Johanna Hedver, who is an artist who works in all sorts of different mediums, including like performance art, plays, poetry, music, song, that kind of thing. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, and yeah, it was fine. I didn't love it. I will say that I adored the first line of this, which is in the section called Euripides is not a genius, I am. And it's just one. The only thing the patriarchy is selling that I've ever wanted to buy is genius. Just like a mood. In fact, it might even be a genius line. There's one section at the beginning, the bit that I read out from, that is about a cycle of plays that Hedver wrote, inspired by various Greek plays, Greek tragedies. I don't remember if they were tragedies. So one of them is the Odyssey. One of them is... Sorry, there's not 3 plays, there's 4 plays. One of them is based on Hecuba, which I don't know very well, by Euripides. One of them is based on the Odyssey. One of them is based on Alcestis, which is the one that I would love to have seen. One of them is based on Medea. And yeah, I did actually then rewatch Medea after it was mentioned here. And also, oh yeah, a film I'm watching is mentioned it too, and I was like, maybe it's just time to watch a version of it. But anyway, that's not relevant. So it's interesting. It does feel like a weird thing in terms of the time of this, because I think at one point they definitely say that they're writing this as a way to kind of be done with this part of their artistic practice and also just life in general. So it does feel a little bit like, okay, you just, like, it happened and now it's done. This, you know, but you know, I do find their work inspiring. And yeah, they also talk about like just really hating men in this at one point. There's like a particular thing that happens, and like I enjoyed that cathartic rage, you know. So the next thing I read was Squire by Sarah Alfagi and Nadia Shamas. Yeah, this is a graphic novel. It's quite a chunky graphic novel. I sort of knew that I was gonna really enjoy it from the acknowledgements. Which the one from Nadia, I think, is to Edward Said for giving me the language to see myself clearly, which I thought was lovely. So it's a really nice, colourful fantasy graphic novel, and it's about a girl called Isa, who is born to a community of people who are like second-class citizens, and in fact within the sort of empire, or like the border of the empire that they are unfortunately part of, they, you know, they can't go to particular places. And I personally, reading this, obviously I know this is based not on on this, but I did think a lot actually about Palestine and how Palestinians are forced into particular areas and they don't have freedom of movement either. But one way for Isa to get out of her sort of second-class citizen status and to gain citizenship and therefore, yeah, rights and things like that, is to become a knight. So she's dreaming of becoming a squire, and then once you become a squire you can become a knight. She does that. She enlists in a squire training program, and yeah, it's sort of about that. It's definitely a fantasy book that is about decolonization and also about colonization and how ideologies of imperialism and, yeah, like racist prejudice are enacted and come about, but it's also just like a story, you know. So I really enjoyed it. Yeah, sometimes occasionally with the art style I did have trouble like trying to figure out what was actually being like happening. Like I didn't really, yeah, there were a couple times when I was like, I don't understand what this image is trying to show me. But other than that, I thought it was nice. And, you know, I think if you are looking for fantasy books that do talk about decolonization and colonization, this is one to put on your list. I sort of am working on a list of those, and maybe I'll make a video, but I don't know, it's like years in the making. So the next book I read was Experiments in Imagining Otherwise by Lola Olufemi. So this is a sort of collection of experiments, including short stories, poems, just like thoughts, political kind of, yeah, notes, ideas on various aspects of, I don't know, like politicized life. You know, I would say it has a particular black feminist focus, but it's also not about that at the same time. It's about sort of the otherwise. It's about the position of being against things. It's about love and comradeship and what that looks like. It's about revolution and how we get there and what we have to give up in order to get there. It's about relationships, being. It's about archives. It's about past, present and future. It's about history and yeah, imagining the past, imagining the future. It's, yeah, it is very short, and, you know, for me some of these experiments didn't work, but, you know, I think that's kind of good. I want people to take risks when they experiment. I don't want them to want things to work so badly that they don't. I don't know, do you know what I mean? Like, the fact that these didn't all work for me almost made me like it more. Yeah, it's just like fun, and there is like a really playful energy to this, as well as a way that it takes playfulness seriously as a practice of world building in the context of, you know, anti-capitalist revolutions. Yeah, I think, you know, if you're looking for the sort of next step in feminist politics and texts, then this is something to check out. I wouldn't say it's like a beginner text because it's quite like nebulous and yeah, exploratory rather than definite and clear. Which, I mean, you know, I guess if that's okay, if you're okay with like starting there, that's fine too, but, you know. So yeah. The next book I read was Queer Ukraine, an anthology of LGBTQI plus Ukrainian voices during wartime, edited and translated by the DVIJKA Collective, or the Divya, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, collective. This was honestly a mixed bag for me, which is a shame. Like, I obviously wanted to love it. I really struggled with, honestly, like at least half of the collection for various different reasons, but I did sort of end up finding a couple pieces in it that really did work for me and I really enjoyed. The main one that I loved was by someone called Elliot Miskovich, sorry, I'm not sure, called Tuning the Bandura, which is sort of a cross from the 1990s to present day, and is about and by someone who's Jewish and has Ukrainian heritage. I've lost a bit where I was, but basically, yeah, it's just a really beautiful sort of fragmentary story, insights and observations. It's also, I guess it's also what I sort of expected the rest of the collection to be, whereas I felt like it wasn't like that. But this story is just particularly like politically committed to decolonization, to supporting and uplifting the marginalized, and to standing in solidarity with people across the globe, including, you know, this person is in America, and they obviously, I think they take serious a commitment to the sovereignty and the like struggle for justice that Indigenous people are going through across Turtle Island. And yeah, I don't know, and being in solidarity with that and part of that struggle, and also seeing being part of that struggle as being part of the global chain of struggle against imperialism and capitalist oppression, including homophobia and transphobia and all of that. So I love that piece, and the ones after it were also better, but it is quite late in the collection. I also just felt like there were a couple pieces where, so there's one quite long extended piece which I think is maybe also a shame about, like, it's called Transness in traditional Ukrainian culture, but it does this like sort of deep dive where it goes back in time, but in a way that's like very historically inaccurate, basically, and there's a lot of claims in it. And I'm not saying that there's no transness in Ukrainian culture or in the past. Like, I fundamentally believe that there were trans and queer people in the past, and they materially changed and influenced and, yeah, like participated in life, and you can see them on the record. And, you know, it's foolish to say that you can't call people queer or trans because they didn't have those words, because, like, you know, sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't, but like refusing to name people as something that we can use, language is inherently flawed, so let us use it to claim our history rather than being all finicky about it as a way basically to erase queer and trans people from history. But anyway, but I do believe that really fundamentally, but then yeah, that doesn't mean I believe that, like, you know, you can just make a load of claims about like history. And also, yeah, there's some stuff about like what it means that there were myths about transgendered experiences and what that means, because I feel like those things are really contested and interesting discussions about like why things show up in myth versus how they appear in cultures in other ways, including, anyway. So yeah, I thought it was oversimplified at best, but I am glad I read this, and I just loved that piece, so I am really glad I did that. I'm gonna see if it's online or something, or maybe I can share it in some capacity. Okay, got two more things. So for those who've been here for a while, you'll know that I lost a bunch of books a couple years ago when I sent myself some of my books when I was moving stuff from various places to other places. And one of the books I lost was The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, and I finally saw this copy and it was like really cheap, so I decided to replace it, and then I basically immediately read it. Well, maybe not immediately, like a couple of weeks later I read it. And I'm so glad I did. I loved this so much. I thought it was really incredible. I was also absolutely terrified. I wanted to read it in a day, but when it got into the evening, or like actually into the nighttime, I was just like, there's no way I can do this. It's too scary for me. Obviously I am a scaredy cat, but I also do just think that Shirley Jackson is like really talented in how she creates tension and atmosphere and haunting, and I love how this is obviously very queer. Queerness is kind of a haunting itself in this. It's also sort of like a thing that you cannot look directly at. It's something that follows you around, is unnameable, is some kind of noxious shape, is some kind of noise that follows you, is something that shakes into you, but is not something that you can pinpoint down and therefore turn fully away from, because you don't even know where you're turning from until maybe you finally do. Yeah, it's just wonderful. And yeah, I haven't told you what it's about, but like it's about this guy called Dr. Montague, and he has found this house called Hill House, and he thinks that there's some kind of like supernatural phenomena going on. He's a doctor, like a PhD kind of doctor, not like a doctor, I think. And so he invites a couple people to stay with him in this house so that they can observe the supernatural stuff in it. And that is what happens. The people who own the house, they send like one of their nephews or something to stay there as well, and then there's two women, one called Theodora and one called Eleanor, who also show up because they've had some kind of propensity towards the supernatural or ghostly or whatever. So yeah, and one thing that happens is when we meet them, Theodora decided to take up the offer of doing this because she had just had an argument with a friend who she lives with, and things were said that couldn't be unsaid. And, you know, immediately you kind of know that like the word friend there is doing a lot of work in the sentence in terms of queer relationships. And yeah, but Eleanor actually is more of the like focus of it, and I loved it a lot. I really, really did. Shirley Jackson is really incredible. I did give this 5 stars like I gave The Haunting, nope, that's this book. We Have Always Lived in the Castle, that's what it's called. But I do think I like that one better than this, but that one also has like 5 years and 2 rereads. Or like 1 reread, but you know, a reread on its side, so I feel like, you know. But yeah, just really fantastic, and I would definitely recommend this. Okay, and then the last book I read, which I think I read literally the whole of May because it did take me a long time, and that is No Modernism Without Lesbians by Diana Suhaimi. I think I am going to make a full video of this, of me reviewing this, because I do think I have quite a lot to say, and obviously modernism is like a big deal for me. So I won't go into it here very much, but overall I didn't really like this at all. Hard to like synthesize down, but I think for a couple reasons, like main reasons. I would say one main reason is that this feels very surface level. It's also very descriptive. It doesn't really feel like you get much insight into the actual people in it. But also I think a fundamental problem for it is Diana Suhaimi is obviously, well, I was going to say biphobic, but maybe that's not fair, but I do think she's like very weird about bisexuality, and definitely participates in, like, sometimes not necessarily a definite erasure of bisexuality, but just a kind of like implicit one. And then also something that comes to the fore with the chapter on Briar, because basically this is about 4 women who broke the rules. Sylvia Beach, Natalie Barney, Briar and Gertrude Stein. And in Briar's chapter, it feels increasingly more and more uncomfortable, I think, to me. Or it actually feels like uncomfortable the whole way through. Because from the very beginning, you know that Briar has said, you know, that felt like she was a boy born into a girl's body and was in the wrong body, and like really struggled with that, with forced womanhood, girlhood onto her, and spoke, you know, about that discomfort in a way that I think today, with any kind of awareness of transness, it's hard not to say wasn't at least a little bit trans. And obviously you can be like a non-binary lesbian, you can be a trans lesbian, like that's, I'm not necessarily saying that, although I actually am not sure if Briar would be considered bisexual. Anyway, but the whole thing in the chapter is that Diana Suhaimi just doesn't want to deal with that at all, even though she does directly quote and reference that, like Briar saying those kinds of things. So it feels very weird and disconnected. I really disliked that part. And I also think that Diana Suhaimi is an absolute coward when it comes to the politics of modernism. Yeah, like I said on the back, you know, these women are called like women who broke the rules, but that whole framework just completely falls apart when you consider how like Natalie Clifford Barney and Gertrude Stein were both fascist sympathisers. Gertrude Stein described some like Nazi policies in Vichy France as like really beautiful, when like all of the children, like the Jewish children in her village, had just been sent to Auschwitz. You know, there's a lot of like really deplorable stuff connected with modernism. In the Sylvia Beach chapter we get a little bit about it, because Sylvia Beach was like a bit more interesting and like politically laughed, but yeah, Natalie, in fact, the reason why I say it's cowardly is that like like in the Natalie Clifford Barney chapter, we just skip way ahead to her death. We don't go over during the Second World War, so we just don't talk about the fact that she was like a fascist sympathiser. And it's sort of the same with Gertrude Stein as well. There is no discussion of Gertrude Stein saying really, really positive things about the Nazis and stuff like that. Like I said, that was a bit scattered, but basically I was really disappointed in this and I didn't like it very much. And I think that if you're looking to learn more about modernist women and sapphic modernism and lesbian modernism, there are better books out there that are much less, yeah, like politically misguided and irresponsible and incorrect. Because like there is just a way that it just all makes you not trust Diana Suhaimi. Like I don't really trust what she told me that I didn't know, so I'm not sure if it's true. So yeah, that's a shame, but I am glad to finally finish reading it. Those are the things I read in May. Let me know if you've read any of them or if you want to read any of them. I hope you enjoyed the video that I do make about No Modernism Without Lesbians whenever I make it, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye! I realised I managed to forget to talk about the book I finished most recently that was one of my favourite books of the year. I'm really sleep deprived, okay? But yeah, so I picked up briefly A Delicious Life by Nell Stevens, which had been, you know, it's been on my radar since it came out because it sounded kind of like exactly my thing. Finally, the library hold that I had for the audiobook came in this month, so I had to read it. Otherwise, I'd have to wait like 47 billion more weeks. I loved it a lot. I gave it 5 stars. It was incredible. Basically, it's about, well, it's narrated by a lesbian ghost, kind of. I think I would say she's a lesbian ghost, even if she wasn't like a lesbian human. That's how I would think about it. Maybe I'm incorrect, that's fine if I am. Called Blanca, who like I just fucking loved, who was a teenage girl, and yeah, she died in like the 1400s, I want to say. And since then she has been sort of haunting this charter house in Valdemossa, and in the 1840s, definitely around then. Wait, maybe it was earlier than that. No, I think it was the 1840s. I could be wrong though. When basically her charter house is visited by the French writer Georges Sand and Chopin, who she's currently in a relationship with, and also George Sand's two children, Solange and Maurice. And it's just kind of like about that, and it's just so fantastic. Like, it's so beautifully written. It's sort of if like a lesbian ghost was trying to write a Sarah Waters novel. It has that same kind of like earthy, grounded, like descriptive, historical, yeah, embodied kind of writing to it. It's so, like, really beautiful. It's quite a lot about desire too, and I think like the way that desire was written about at points was really, really beautiful. And yeah, like I said, I loved Blanca, and I loved it. I thought it was really wonderful. It's also a little bit about kind of like motherhood and being a creative mother. It's also about, yeah, love and care and difference and history, and yeah, music too. There's a really nice sort of, yeah, way that Chopin's music and it is included and described, and I would really, really recommend it. I think it's wonderful, and I'm just like it's a great, I'm so glad it exists as a book. I was like just finishing it as I was like leaving the house yesterday, and I stepped out of the door and then I just like started crying immediately about it. So anyway, sorry for forgetting it, but it's not because the quality of the book is bad, it's just because I forgot.